I answer questions about my changing opinions on role-playing games today on Daddy Rolled a One. Hello there, and welcome back. I'm Martin, and this is a new video series that I'm going to be making. I think I'm not really quite sure where to put it. It's going to cover a little bit of history. There's going to be a little bit of reviews of tabletop role-playing games in this, but ultimately what this is, I'm going to be discussing some questions that Ben Milton over at Questing Beasts asked to a bunch of dungeon tubers. And he posted this last week. He asked the questions when he was at the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, or PAGE, and his viewers sent in questions for him to ask. And so this kind of falls into that big category of people that make Dungeons and Dragons YouTube videos, or some people call them dungeon tubers. And I watched the video, and he talked to people like Professor Dungeon Master from Dungeon Craft, and Bob World Builder, and Justin Alexander from the Alexandrian, and Baron DeRop from Dungeon Masterpiece, for example. And I've met most of those folks, had lunch with 3 out of the 4 of them. I haven't met Bob World Builder yet, but I thought it'd be interesting for you guys to hear my answers to these particular questions. So this is kind of a different video for my channel, and there's actually going to be some differences also in the way that I'm presenting the material later on in the video. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And I would love to hear your opinions on this. Like, do you want more of these kinds of videos, or do you want me to kind of just stick with what I've been doing all along? So let me know about that in the comments. And there is going to come a part where I'm going to be talking about the kind of content that I'm creating here and getting some opinions from you guys. So I would love to hear from you on that. And but since this is something new that I'm trying, I would like you to stick around and kind of watch it, see how I answer these questions about my changing and shifting opinions on tabletop role-playing games over time and why. So I'm going to obviously go into more depth because it's my channel. That's what I do. So it's not just going to be a quick one-sentence answer to those questions, but I'm going to discuss the background of why I'm picking the things that I'm picking. And so if this is the kind of content that you enjoy, and particularly if you like this different style of video, please make sure to like it, and then subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when I upload new videos. It's very important to do all those kinds of things during the first hour that the video is posted. And if you could just double check and make sure, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, subscribing to the channel really, really helps. I recently was talking to someone with the comments who mentioned that they get served my videos all the time by the YouTube algorithm, and they didn't actually realize they weren't subscribed to my channel because they just kept getting the videos and they kept watching them, and then one day noticed that they weren't subscribed. So if that's you and you could help to subscribe, I would really appreciate it. All right, so let's dive in and talk about the first question that Ben's fans or his viewers asked him to ask these other Dungeon Tube people. It was really a 2-part question. So the first part of the question is, what is your favorite tabletop role-playing game to GM? And if you've watched my channel before, it will come, of course, as no surprise that it is now this version of Dungeons and Dragons, the 1981 basic set, commonly referred to as BX D&D because it also has the expert set, which is this book here, the expert book, covering levels 4 through 14, because this only covers levels 1 through 3. People will also call it Moldvay Basic, or sometimes you'll hear Moldvay Cook. I'm trying to get in the habit of referring it to Moldvay Cook Marsh because while Thomas Moldvay edited this version of the book, this one was written by Dave Cook, but it was edited by Steve Marsh. And Steve Marsh is currently working on a sequel to this book, the Dungeons & Dragons expert set from 1981, for the companion rules, which were teased in this and said that they were coming to cover levels 15 and beyond, but it was never published because in 1983, this version of the game was revised yet again into the 1983, what's called the BECMI version. So there is a companion set for Dungeons & Dragons that exists, but it was for a different version of basic than this one. All right, so this is the one that I prefer playing now. Why is that? Well, there are a lot of reasons. If you'd asked me even just 5 years ago what my favorite version of D&D was to run, to Game Master or Dungeon Master, I probably would have said either for 3.5 or Pathfinder First Edition, which I kind of just pool all together as being like one thing. But that was the one that I had run the most. And it was really the one where I felt that at that point in time, I had gotten the most used to. But now, after having spent the past little over 4 years running a game of this system, which is the one I started with all the way back in 1981, I've been running this game for my daughter and her friends. So if you didn't know that, or you're new to the channel, I have a playlist called DM Advice, I think. And in that playlist, what I talk about is this campaign I'm running for my daughter. I don't do session recaps. What I talk about are the decisions I made, how I prepped for that campaign, how I changed existing things in the adventures that I'm running, because I'm using old school adventures to run, like old TSR adventures. And how I kind of added different, atmosphere, or different, changed the mechanics, did different things in that game. So that's the kind of advice it is. It's not just here's what happened during my session. I don't do those types of things. So that said, let's talk about some of the reasons that I like running this game more so than some of the other ones. And the first one, very clearly for me, is going to be that this is such a flexible system. And it is, I guess, what some people would call rules light, but I think a lot of people kind of mistake what that means, and they assume what that means is that you're just making everything up and that there are no rules, which is not the case. For me, what I like about this one in terms of the rules light framework is that there's no things like feats or skills in this particular game. So that's less on me to have to remember as a dungeon master all these things that my players might be doing during the game, because I don't have all that memorized. I can't memorize hundreds of feats across multiple different versions of books and remember that, there might be a way of them doing something that I wasn't expecting. And then, which is not bad. I want to be surprised, but sometimes those things to me can be a little bit game breaking. And again, that's just on me as a dungeon master, but keeping track of that stuff is just not something that I enjoy. Trying to spend so much time figuring out how to challenge players based on all these suites of powers that they have, versus me trying to just be creative and think of something really cool and fun to do. So the other side of that I really enjoy is that my players spend less time looking at their character sheets, and they spend more time looking at me and interacting with me and with the other players to figure things out. So when you don't have all these mechanical based rules on your character sheet to tell you how to respond to a situation, to me, and what I've seen in the way that I've DM'd, like I do have an ongoing 3.5 game that's been going since 2001. It's been on a bit of a hiatus, but that game, what I noticed the difference between that and then the one I run for my daughter and her friends is that my daughter and her friends are much more likely to come up with creative, imaginative solutions that are not based around game mechanics. They're based around the description of the environment that I gave them, the problem at hand, and the background of their characters and things that they've done in the past in the game. And then they'll come up with a solution to something. And that's the kind of surprise that I want, that I expect, or that I don't expect, but that I am okay being, hit with something that I didn't expect, because I get so much enjoyment out of that. And to me, it's more fun as a game master versus, I'm going to roll my bluff check and, because I figure this guy's bluffing or whatever. I mean, that's not maybe a great example, but like relying on dice and prescribed skills and feats and powers and all that kind of stuff to get your way out of a situation versus just thinking your way out of a situation. So, in the old school community, a lot of people will call that player skill versus character skill. There's a long ongoing debate on that. And, I definitely have a player in my 3.5 game, and like, he doesn't like the idea of player skill. He wants to know exactly what his character is and isn't allowed to do so that there are no surprises to him in game. And so, and that's fine. That's the way he likes to play. It's just, I don't really like playing that way. And that's one of the reasons why that game's been on hiatus for a while, because I would like to switch it to another system, but I'm just not sure that I'm ready to do that yet. So that's part of it as far as this particular thing. I also like that, the rules in here are really interesting and make me think about how to use them in a game differently. So I think you guys have seen this before, but I'm actually running this using this. So this is Old School Essentials, which is a retro clone of this game. The short version of a retro clone is that, and this is very generic. It doesn't apply to all of them, but in general, what it did back, like a few years ago and before that, was that it would use the OGL, the Open Game License, to basically reverse engineer earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons. So the original Open Game License that was published in 2000 was published for the third edition rules of Dungeons and Dragons. But what people realized they could do was take that Open Game License, and this wasn't the intent. This isn't why they published it and why Wizards put the OGL into place in the first place. But people figured out that they could take the earlier editions of D&D, second and first and basic and original D&D, and use that OGL to republish those rules. Now, the first retro clones weren't 100% faithful because there was some questions like, is that legal or not? And they were, people were treading carefully because it was a new thing. However, this one, it was originally called BX Essentials, and then it changed to Old School Essentials. This is 100% faithful adaptation of this. The only time when there's any kind of difference between the rules is when there was a contradiction in the rules between this book, Basic, covering the levels 1 through 3, and this book, Expert, covering levels 4 through 14. Every once in a while, and it's very rare, but there's a few times where there's things in here that are slightly contradictory. And so when Gavin Norman, who's the guy behind Necrotic Gnome, which is the company that publishes Old School Essentials, when he came across those, he had to make a decision of which of the two rules to publish. And so in that case, I guess you can't say that it's 100% faithful because it has one rule and not the other. So, which I think makes sense and it makes it clean. But, people talk about the layout and stuff in here, which is true. I do love the layout, but that's not why I like running it. It's easy to use at the table for sure. And so that is really cool. But what I like are things like, it's like the procedures for how things happen in the game. And they're very cleanly laid out in this version of the game, much more so, I think, than in later editions that delve more into like character options and that stuff, and less about how to run the game. Not that they don't have how to run a game, but I feel like it's kind of buried in different places and it's not necessarily always clear and it's not as concisely presented. So like if you look at a sequence of play per turn for dungeon adventuring, it tells you sequence of play, wandering monsters, actions, description, and then the end of the turn. And like, that's just so simple. It's simply presented, and that stuff is in here. It's just presented, differently in here, make it a little bit easier. But then you have your wilderness adventuring, sequence of play per day, decide on the course, losing direction, wandering monsters, description, end of the day. So just going through this kind of stuff, waterborne adventuring, same thing. It's these sequences and procedures, encounter sequence, surprise, encounter distance, initiative, actions, conclusion. And it just makes it so clear how to run these things and make stuff like dungeon adventuring and wilderness adventuring and stuff, make that as exciting, if not more so, than combat and encounters. So I really like that part of this game as well. One of the reasons that I like running it. So let's talk about some other reasons I like running this. Well, quite frankly, one of the things that I can do with this version of the game is run all the old adventures that I've collected over the years that I started collecting back in 1981. I have a ton. So you guys know, again, if you've watched my DM advice playlist, I ran my players through this B2 in search. I keep on the Borderlands, sorry. And which was included in this original box set. I just keep it separately now because I was running it so often. But I ran them through this module, but then I transitioned them into this module. Now, this is for advanced D&D. It's not for basic. It wasn't ever intended to be used with the system, but guess what? You can totally use this. Some people will say, well, how do you convert it? I don't. I literally just don't convert it. I run advanced D&D using Old School Essentials or BX. Just as it's written in here, I really don't change anything. Every once in a while, there's a monster or something in here that has slightly more hit points than you might expect. But it hasn't been a problem yet. So, and for me, that's just easier because I don't want to spend time converting. I want to spend time playing. Okay. So that's going to come up later in another discussion. But I have tons of these adventures. So, I mean, this is just up through the seas. So just all of these adventures that I've had over the years, and I haven't run most of them. And so the fact that I can use this system to run these so that I get use out of them, is awesome to me. I love that, and I love that I don't have to convert these to 5e. I don't have to buy. I mean, Goodman Games put. I think it was Goodman Games did those really gorgeous like original adventures reincarnated books where they converted. They like included old school adventures. Like I know for sure. Well, this was one of them. They did two in one. But I think I can't remember some of the other ones that they did. I know that there's like a Expedition to the Barrier Peaks is in there, and some other ones like that, Isle of Dread. But they converted that. They included the original version, and then they converted them to 5e. And I almost bought that for this when I was going to run it for my daughter. And then I realized, like, why am I doing that? I don't want to run 5e. I want to run this. And so for me, I didn't buy those. That was a decision that I made to kind of save money and space on my shelf, buying something that I wasn't really that interested in because I wanted to use the original rules. So that's definitely part of why I wanted to keep using this and why I enjoy using it, because I'm able to do that. But also one of the other things that has happened is that the community who makes old school games, we'll call it that, they really got kind of focused on hacking this version of the game. Probably more so than any other. So there are so many different clones of this game. Obviously, there's Old School Essentials, which we talked about, but there's Labyrinth Lord, one of the very first retro clones to ever be published. I said one of the very first, not the first. But there's also basic fantasy role playing. There's even stuff like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which takes it and then makes a few changes, but it's still very broadly compatible with this. And then there's so much stuff that's available for those systems that is so creative and it's new. So not only do I have to do I get to use my old TSR adventures, but I'm not limited to using them with the system. So Old School Essentials has a ton of stuff. They've got, all these really fun adventures. I love the digest size, but these are super creative. And again, just even with the presentation, with the maps on the covers and, all these random tables and the artwork and everything in here, these are really, really fun adventures to run. But there's also stuff by, like, again, Lamentations of the Flame Princess makes some really good adventures. They also make a bunch that, like, I really just don't like at all and have zero interest in. But they have quite a few that I really like. In fact, my very first video that I made for this channel was a review of one of those adventures written by my friend Kelvin Green. It was his Big Terror in the Streets box set adventure, and so, which is a really fun adventure. And so they have so much creative stuff coming out of here that I think other versions of D&D, because there are clones of most of the earlier editions of D&D, but I don't see as much material coming out of them as I do stuff made for BX D&D. So that's just a quick example of some of the other very, very closely compatible things with BX. But another thing that really, really shines with the BX rules engine is the fact that it is so very hackable without breaking the system. So and what I mean by that is, like, in 3.5 or even in 5e, but especially in 3.5, what I noticed was that if you start to pull a thread to remove something or change something that you don't like, 9 times out of 10, you are going to completely break the system, because it's going to have these unforeseen consequences that didn't occur to you when you were making that change, but it's going to come up a few sessions later or whatever, and then you're going to realize, like, oh, that's why that happened, because now something is completely out of whack. It's completely imbalanced, and you're not able to kind of, like, put that genie back in the bottle, right? Because the rules engine is so tightly in around, and every little piece relies on every other piece to create this whole. And so removing part of that or changing something completely changes how that system works, to the point where it usually just breaks down. Okay. But BX is just not like that at all. So as an example, I use stuff from 5e in my game that I run for my daughter. I use one of the things from 4e I've looked at using before, but also just like other games. So I've done stuff like I've used the chase mechanics from Neverland. Now, this is designed for 5e, but that's not a 5e mechanic. It's not a mechanic for any game, but there's a chase mechanic in here. And again, I've talked all about that in my DM advice video of using that. But But I've used stuff from Knave, which is a completely different game, right? But there's most of this is just tables, and there's just really good ideas in here that I've been able to add to this game. Stuff from Magical Industrial Revolution for like cities and city-based campaigns and things like that. I've used things from there. I've used dungeon crawling rules and light source rules and just resource management in general from like Veins of the Earth. I have a whole video review of that particular book. I've used the wilderness rules from Into the Weird and Wild. This is designed to be system neutral, but it has rules in it that are not rules from BX, but I use them in my game and it works just fine. So I have yet to have a problem where I included a rule or mechanic from another system or another adventure or another game, whatever it is, and put it into my BX game, and it's yet to cause any problems like, down the road, right? So that's why when I do my designing, that's why when I did my my supplement for Alchemist Explosions and Inventions that was on Kickstarter last summer, that was done within I did it within Old School Essentials license, but that's essentially the BX system, right? I'm comfortable designing in that system and being creative in ways where I don't have to spend time worrying about things like, if I put this power in here, but then a character abuses that by mixing it with this feat from a book that I don't own, it's going to be a problem, right? I don't have to worry about that because that doesn't happen in BX. So, that's one of the reasons why I love running this system so much, and I just get so much joy out of it. Partly it could just be because I'm also running it for my daughter and her friends, and that in and of itself is just its own measure of happiness. But I definitely, I've run this system before. I mentioned for last year, my friend's 50th birthday, he wanted me to run a session, and I basically created my own system that was a hack of a mix of BX and also from an early beta test or, whatever you want to call it, of Professor Dungeon Master's Deathbringer game. And that was on his Patreon. And it worked great. And I had so much fun running it because, again, I wasn't bogged down by like having to carry a ton of rule books to the table to like look up all these minutia of rules of things that I just don't know off the top of my head. So that's BX and the game that I most prefer to GM. Okay, so now let's talk about the game that I prefer to play when I'm playing. Well, obviously you see I've got Savage Worlds out here, but I really like to play any kind of game. I know it's a cliche answer, but for me, for the most part, these days, I spend most of my time running games. And so playing is a real treat because it's something that I really enjoy. And if someone's willing to take the time to run a game and it's people that I know and I can sit down with them at a table, I really, really don't like playing online. I'm just not good at it. I just can't focus as much and whatnot. But the reason that I game partially is like, I just like getting together with my friends, having a scheduled time to do that. Of course, I like contributing to the game. I like, knowing that my character's actions are affecting the outcome of what's going to happen. And, the world or the scenario, whatever it is that like I'm doing something with my character that is going to push the narrative forward and change the story or change the outcome. So I do enjoy all of that kind of stuff. I get less enjoyment out of doing like cool combos and all that kind of thing. Like, mixing, like I said, like mixing feats and skills and all that kind of stuff. Like I get zero enjoyment out of that. I know a lot of people like that's a main part of the game for them. It's just not something that I particularly enjoy. And so because of that, like I have had fun playing like 5e. I had fun playing 4e, but those were both very short, like 1 or 2 session games tops. And then that was it. I had fun when I was playing 3.5 for a long time, but at the end, it did seem to start to get bogged down as we got really much like higher in level. And there was just, my character sheet was like 8 pages long as I had to remember like all these different things that I could do. And, again, not something that I particularly was enjoying at that time. I was still enjoying getting together, but the actual playing part was not something that I would necessarily look forward to. So I think that's where kind of Savage Worlds sort of fits in for me. So as a player, I would love to play an old school game. I would love if somebody ran me through a BX game. It's just none of the DMs that I know. There's 2 that kind of switch places that I play with most often. And neither one of them is going to run an old school game. It's just not for them. So I've been playing Savage Worlds since about, I'd say roughly 2007. It might have been a little bit before that. I forget exactly when the game debuted, but it's been a while. Okay. And because of that, I'm familiar with it. I don't have to spend a lot of time to kind of figure out new rules. And I know that's a tough thing for someone publishing a new role playing game, is the idea of like how many people at this point are looking for a new system. Um, but new games can work. So we've seen that with the stuff like the Aliens role playing game or Blade Runner. They have niche audiences, but they're pretty popular, right? So you can sell a new game. And so this game came out and we all kind of wanted to take a look at it. And as a player, I like a lot of the different things that this game has to offer. So there is I think the key part for me is that this game is very specifically designed to work with any kind of genre that you want. And I know people will say like, oh, you can play any genre with 5e. You can play space battles and that kind of stuff. You can, absolutely, but the game's not really designed for that. And there are times where there are unintended consequences and things break down when you bring in elements, especially technology, that wasn't baked into the game itself. And especially because 5e is complicated. It's less complicated than 3.5 for sure. But there are layers of complexity to 5e with how the mathematics and the different pieces fit together to make sure that everything stays equal. That when you start to add things to that game that weren't part of it originally, I don't think it always does a great job of emulating those types of genres. This was specifically designed to be able to be used with any genre that you want to play with. And I think it's brilliant that it is able to pull that off. Now, a lot of people will think that this is not as complex as they're looking for. I think for me, it's just the right amount of complexity as a player. So, as far as running it, I have run this before. It is pretty easy to run on the fly. I ran my friends years ago. I've mentioned before on the channel, but my friend had a tabletop board game channel that he ran on YouTube that was very, very popular. And they were looking to adapt it to do a role-playing game. And so we were trying to test out like different games. And this was one of the ones that he was considering for a while, not the one he ultimately went with. But he wanted to see it as a player and how it would work. And I had never run Savage Worlds before. I'd only played it like a few times. And I was able to run this in a genre that wasn't at the time in a published thing. I did a post-apocalyptic campaign setting of my own design that I'd been working on for years, but designed for Gamma World, the original role-playing game Gamma World. And I was able to convert that with just like maybe 2 days of notice to run it in Savage Worlds and like no problem. So it's easy to run. The reason why I didn't pick this as my favorite game to run is partly just because I love the BX rules engine, all those reasons that I mentioned, but very specifically, I wouldn't want to spend time to convert all of my old TSR modules to this system. That's a huge drawback for me. So the fact that I'm able to use them with BX is a huge deal. From a player standpoint, so I have played this in Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu, both 1920s, like pulp era, the original, but also like in the 1980s genre, and it worked perfectly well for both. One of our GMs used Savage Worlds to run us through a Warhammer 40K role-playing game, like a few sessions campaign, which was really, really fun. I played it in Deadlands, Weird West kind of setting. If you're not familiar with that, kind of like late 1800s, but with like weird, creepy stuff going on, magic stuff. So I played it through that. I played through a Weird War II game in this, which I'm going to address in just a second. But I've also played through a 1950s Cold War campaign, that very long campaign for that, which also has like some cosmic horror elements in it. And all of those worked beautifully with this system. One of the things that I think is really cool about that would be, and why it can adapt to any system. If you go to the arcane backgrounds here, so this game has a system called edges, which are kind of like feats in 5e, roughly speaking. Well, one of the edges that you can take is called arcane background. And that allows you, gives you your character the ability to have all these different powers. broadly speaking, kind of like spells in D&D, but they're called powers in this. Well, the arcane backgrounds that you can pick are gifted, magic, miracles, psionics, and weird science. So gifted is sort of like you're just born with this power and you don't really know where it came from, or you could be an alien, or it could have superpowers. You could be like a metahuman, whatever it is. But it's unique kind of to you. It's not like a typical thing. Arcane background would be like a wizard in Dungeons and Dragons. Then you have miracles, which would be like your divine casters. You get it from the power of your spirit or your god or like whatever. And then you have psionics, mental powers. And then you have weird science. Obviously, what that is, you have to have a weird contraption to use your powers. But the thing is, the powers themselves are the same. They're completely the same. So it doesn't matter. So if you take, as an example, the power blast, you can use that as an arcane caster, a miracle caster, a weird science caster, psionic caster. It doesn't matter. The power is the same and it does the same amount of damage. So because that's what it's about. It's about being quick and fast. You don't have to have 4 different spells that do the same amount of damage just because you have a different arcane background. And the way that you make them different is by naming them in what they call trappings. So you, as a player, get to decide how your spell manifests. And so they said, like, here's 2 different examples. So a druid in a typical fantasy setting, they might call their bolt spell. So bolt is, again, it's not a spell, it's a power. But you see it's listed here. Here's your bolt. Okay. And they might call their bolt spell splinters, and it's made of shards of wood. And then boost or lower trait might be blessing or curse of Gaia. And then entangle, they would just keep the name entangle. But then a protection spell they might call bark skin. Okay, but then they said a mad scientist might call their bolt an acid gun, and their boost or lower trait ability they might call Dr. Worthington's patented pep pills. And then entangle might be Dr. Worthington's fast drying resin. And then protection might be electrostatic clothing. So as the player, you get to decide what those are and describe it during the game to the GM, which is super creative and part of the most fun I have playing this game. But also, it doesn't make any difference mechanically. This bolt that this druid casts that's called Splinters is going to do the exact same amount of damage as this bolt called Acid Gun from the Weird Science caster. It's completely the same. And I think that's a really cool game design element. It's very simplified, but it means that you can apply those powers to any different setting or genre that you want, and it's not going to break anything. And the trappings are all just there for flavor and don't have mechanical things to them. So you don't worry about like, oh, if my bolt's made of fire, well, what does that mean? Can something catch on fire? And then what is the fire damage? And how long does it last before it goes out? You don't worry about that. It just looks like fire, and you cast the spell, and it does the same amount of damage as it would as if it were made of ice, or if it were made of screaming bees, or whatever it is, right? That's so. I have a caster in a Deadlands game whose powers manifest as like shadow stuff. So everything that he does looks like weird, creepy shadows moving around, and it doesn't matter if it's like a blast, or if he's like, when he shapeshifts, sometimes he will shapeshift into animals, but his animals always look like they're like they have black fur or black feathers or whatever it is. And they look kind of out of focus, but they're still the same thing, right? And then I have a Dwarven cleric in a Savage Worlds game that we're doing for Pathfinder. I have a whole video where I reviewed that, the Savage Worlds for Pathfinder rules. But I talked about or I have this Dwarven cleric whose spells all manifest with some kind of like earth element to them, whether it's sand or gravel or rocks or whatever it is. Every single thing that he does has that earthy element to it because of the god that he's worshiping in that campaign. So that's always really fun as a player to kind of like make up those different descriptions and stuff. And it gives me a lot of fun when I'm playing Savage Worlds. So and as a reminder, I do have a review of Savage Worlds in general, just the game in general. And then, like I said, I have one for the Savage Worlds for Pathfinder rules, which I thought was a really clever way for Pathfinder to kind of try to expand its audience. So anyway, you can check those out. And those are part of my reviews playlist as well. Another thing I really like about Savage Worlds is the concept of, I told you about edges, which are kind of like beats. Well, they also have something called hindrances, or we used to just call them flaws. But the idea is that your character has issues, and so it could be like you're all thumbs, or you're anemic, or you're arrogant. So, um, and you have to take a flaw when you make a character. It's required. And it's more fun that way because playing a character that's good at everything is boring. But having these flaws helps you to kind of like define your character and gives you some role playing hooks. And usually, not always, but usually edges are mechanically based and flaws, a lot of flaws are like role-playing based. They're not mechanical. And in D&D, people would say that that's bad game design. It's imbalanced because people are just going to forget about role-playing their flaws. Well, and here it's a core part of the game, role-playing your flaws. Now, sometimes it's up to the GM to make sure to put you into a situation where your flaw is going to come to the forefront and you have to role-play that. But it's also on the onus of the player not to forget to play these flaws. So one of my favorite times playing Savage Worlds, my friend ran like I said, a Weird War II game. And the premise of this game, well, we didn't know it was Weird War II. We thought it was just World War II. At least most of the players did. It was a straight up World War II game. And it was intended to be like, a short kind of intro to what could become a campaign. The GM moved and we never finished that campaign. But the idea was that we had a bunch of American paratroopers, and we were going to be jumping into this secret Nazi base kind of toward the end of the war because we'd heard that they were working on some kind of new weapon and we needed to invade and infiltrate and then wipe them out and make sure that the weapon wasn't completed or, steal the plans, whatever it was, right? Well, part of what was fun about this was that my character, he handed out the characters. The GM handed out the characters. We didn't make our own characters. So we showed up and he handed me my character. And the character that I played was an English lieutenant colonel. And I was in charge of the mission from England. Everyone else in the mission was playing an American soldier paratrooper. Reason being was because the British government was the one in charge of the mission and had decided that the best paratroopers available were all Americans because they were just more trained than everybody else. And so they did a joint operation where all the people, like the grunts, I guess you'd call them, were Americans. And then like I was in charge as this English like gentleman officer. And one of my flaws on my sheet, it just said English, which just cracked me up. Just when you see that just written like that, I was like, how funny. But it made me realize like the point of that was that I was not part of these guys. I didn't train with them. I wasn't in boot camp with them. And I was an outsider. I was from a completely different company and I was giving them orders. And so I had to remember this flaw and sort of like play it as though I felt I was better than them. And, but I wasn't really. And, it was a lot of fun. The other thing that was really fun about that, and it was also one of my flaws, I forget how it was detailed, like the shorthand that the GM used on my sheet, but I told you it was a Weird War II setting. Well, none of the other players knew that. I was the only one who knew. And it was because I was part of this secret government organization that had uncovered this plot that the Nazis were creating. I think they were trying to create either zombies or vampires. I mean, something very basic, right? End of the war. They were trying to do something to like help them, keep going. And my character was part of this group that knows that magic exists, right? So, and so because of that, but I had to try to keep the wraps on it because the general populace is not aware that magic exists and things would go haywire if everyone knew that magic was around. So I had to keep very quiet about this, like the purpose of the mission, not let people know that like these were zombies or that these were, vampires or like whatever. But also I had magic weapons. Like I had a wand. And I had to, when I used this wand, I forget what the wand did, but I remember when I used it, I had to describe it as like, oh no, this is like a new technology. We're experimenting. We have a science division that's developing new weapons and stuff. And I had to make it seem like it was a totally legit technological piece of equipment when in fact it was a magic wand. And so tiptoeing around that and everything I was doing when I had these powers and abilities that nobody else had and using them, but having to describe them in such a way that it came across as though it was just completely natural. And that was sort of like one of my flaws, balanced by the fact that I had these powers, which was my edge. So I thought that was a ton of fun. And it was something that was very easy to accomplish in Savage Worlds that would, I think, be a little bit more difficult in a different style of game. Again, you can try to run any genre in any system, but I just think some systems are better suited to doing that. So that's my kind of quick look at Savage Worlds. And then we're going to get into the next part of the video to answer the next 2 questions. And I'm going to change things up in terms of how I present that information. And so I'm looking forward to your guys' feedback once you see it. Okay, welcome to the new part of the video and something new for my channel here. So you'll notice that I'm actually showing myself on camera for the first time. So the background of this is that when I started my channel, almost 2 years ago, and I'd actually I recorded my first video almost a year before I even posted it. So it's been a while, but when I started it, my daughter was having some issues at school, some bullying, people were picking on her, and she was, teenage kids in general can be very mean. And she was very concerned about, if I put my face on camera and people realized that we were related and like it somehow found my channel, that they would use it as an excuse to like pick on her, make fun of her. And, which sucks that she felt like that. I feel bad, but not for me, but for her. But she is getting over that. So she's a little older now, and I think she's not as concerned about that. She's also changed schools and made a new group of friends who are very supportive and nice and things like that. So I thought I would use this as an opportunity to try this out. So I'm not used to it. I'm just using my camera or my phone. That's all I'm using. I don't have a nice background set up here. So I know most people have most dungeon tubers, usually the default has become to show yourself in front of your books of all your D&D stuff. Well, my books are all spread out, so it's hard to see. I'm going to try to blur the background because it's a little cluttered when I post the video. But back here, all the way back here, these are my box sets, my TSR box sets. So my basic set, Empire of the Petal Throne, my original D&D set, all of that is back here. Okay. Then I have all of my soft cover stuff, like my modules. I have my second edition, like my complete series of handbooks and the historical series. And so all that is over on this bookshelf over here to my front, like right, the way I'm sitting right now. Also has all of my OSR stuff, and it has all of my books like on like D&D history and things like that. So Art and Arcane is there, but also just any book that you've seen me post before where I talk about it is in that bookshelf over there. Now over here to my left on a completely different bookshelf is all of my hardback books. So the entire AD&D first edition collections here, as well as the second edition books that I own, third edition, 3.5, Pathfinder, all that stuff is on that shelf over there. And ideally, yes, they would all be in the same area, the same shelf, but I'm utilizing the space and the width of the shelves the best that I can to maximize the space because I have a lot of books. So that's the short version of that. So I'm going to try this out. Let me know what you guys think. The main reason I decided to do this today is because for this particular segment of the video, I couldn't think of things that I would be showing on my credenza and going through it. It's more of a talking piece, and it felt weird to just have a static talking piece without showing you something. So this is what you're going to get. So again, let me know what you think and if you want me to do more or less of this. But the second question that Ben Milton's viewers wanted him to ask the folks at the page, Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, was basically the gist of it was like, do you wish that you could cover more than TTRPG content? Do you feel that you're boxed into only producing videos about tabletop role-playing game content, or would you like to cover other topics, but you feel like you can't because it would sort of ruin your channel and the algorithm? And so the short version of me is no. I started the channel specifically to cover tabletop role-playing game content. So that's why I started it. My blog was a little more broad when I started out. So my blog came first back in 2011. I started my blog. And back then I talked about all kinds of like what I considered genre stuff. So it was a mixture of role-playing games for sure, but also comic books. I talked a lot of comic books on the blog, and I would talk about like Star Wars stuff, Star Trek, whatever it was that like I thought was cool at the time, or like when new TV shows were coming out, even if they didn't fit into one of those boxes, but they were a genre show, I would talk about that. Over time, the blog has kind of whittled down to focus mostly on just tabletop role-playing game stuff, specifically Dungeons and Dragons, but also like I tried covering a little bit of comics here on my YouTube channel. So I have a few shorts which I stopped making shorts. I tried them out. YouTube was very much pushing them, like you got to make shorts. So I thought like, oh, let's try this out. They really didn't do well. They get hardly any views. And partly I think that's because my shorts were mostly about comic books, like what I was picking up that week. And I thought that was a perfect example. I didn't want to make a whole video about it, but I thought I could use a short to just kind of show like, these are the things I'm picking up at my shop this week. And they just didn't get a lot of engagement, interaction. And, I think like while there is some cross section between a comic book reader or collector and a D&D player, I think that, there's also like my viewers tend to be a little bit on the older side, like, me or even a little bit older. And I think a lot of people just don't read comics anymore. So it wasn't as relevant to them. So that's fine. And also I think that like, it would be weird, like to come to the channel and not know what you're going to get. So my intent is to keep making role-playing game content. I would say that I would like to expand beyond this kind of box that I've maybe artificially put myself into that I didn't mean to. But you'll notice I have 3 different playlists. Well, I have more than 3, but I have 3 main ones, which is I have tabletop role-playing game reviews that's intended for independent publishers. I have, and mostly it's going to be old school stuff, old school Renaissance type products, although I do have the ones for Savage Worlds as well. Then I have my DM advice. Started out as my campaign overview, and I changed the name of the playlist to DM advice. So I have that. And then I have my D&D history reviews. Well, if you go back and look at my channel, my first 5 or 6 videos were either reviews or DM advice. And I think it was mostly reviews actually. And it wasn't until I made that first history video, which was the history of D&D editions, where like in 20 minutes-ish, I cover all at what I called 18 editions at the time. It's a little cheeky because like I called, OD&D plus the Greyhawk Blackmore supplement. I called that the 0.5 edition. It's not an official name, but I was trying to show like how things change over time. Anyway, I made that video, and that was the first video I ever made that kind of like took off, where people really took notice of like I was doing something that I guess other people weren't doing. And so now the way that this channel works is that if I make a video that is not about D&D history, it just doesn't do well. And so I'm really hopeful that I can break out of that a little bit, because for me, I would like to produce different content. But also like, I don't want to just start picking the smallest, nitpickiest thing to talk about in D&D history. I want to keep it like these bigger topics that are relevant to everybody. And at a certain point, of course, I think I would run out of stuff. So, there's a lot out there. I'm not in danger of running out anytime soon, but it is something that's been on the back of my mind, which is that how long can I make these history videos? But I'm even concerned about making a video like this today, even though it's different, even though I'm showing myself on camera for the first time. But I'm wondering how you guys are going to respond to something like this, because it's not in what I think people have come to expect, which is that I'm going to be laying out some like really cool history stuff. So again, that is going to continue to be the focus of the channel, but I'm going to start bringing back in some of these other topics. And I really hope that you guys can give them a chance and watch them and comment on them and support them as much as you do my history videos. So I had one guy, I think it was on Twitter last year, tell me just flat out, he's like, I don't watch your DM advice videos because I don't need any more DM advice. And, I don't begrudge the person for saying that. I just think it's a really interesting viewpoint to have, that you can, at a certain point, you've learned everything that you could know and you can't learn anymore. And so why would you watch the DM advice video? I'm always trying to learn more. And so I was a little taken off guard by that comment. But then recently, if you watch other dungeon tubers, Guy from How to Be a Great GM, like basically just stopped his channel. I don't think he's taking it down. I think he's just not going to make any more videos. And Professor Dungeon Master at Dungeon Craft did a whole video about that. And I guess there was one other guy too, and I just forgot the name off the top of my head, that I think is going to stop making videos as well, and or has already stopped. And the analysis that Professor Dungeon Master mentioned was that when some of these people started, and I think Matt Colville's another good example, although he's still going, but when they started, there were no DM advice channels, and you had this influx of people coming in that were starting to play 5e, and especially during the pandemic that happened. But even before that, 5e was becoming very, very popular, and you had people wanting to play that didn't know how to GM. And then, and I think it was this perfect storm where you had, YouTube becoming a thing that people were looking at more and more for this kind of content, and people creating videos about how to GM and how to be better at it. But it kind of got to a point of saturation, I guess. It's what it sounds like. And so given that context, I've kind of started to understand, like, okay, now I get maybe why my DM advice videos don't do as well. One, I came to the party too late, but also maybe people just feel like they've already got enough of that from other people who exclusively did that kind of thing. And so finding it here on this channel is maybe not what people are looking for. So I do understand that, but I do know there's a lot of people out there who love my DM advice videos. So somebody just recently in the comments basically was talking about how great the advice was that he stopped the video to get a notebook out and take notes on stuff for the games that he's going to run. So I forget your name, for the person who left that comment, thank you so much. That meant a lot that you said that. So I know there's people that do like that kind of stuff. And now that more and more people are starting to not do those, maybe there's an opportunity for me to start that. So that's one thing. And then the reviews is something that, I really want to keep doing, because I want to support these smaller publishers, independent publishers that I think have some of the most creative stuff coming out, way more creative than any corporate stuff that you're seeing, at least from my perspective. So that's my short version on, like, am I going to stop making tabletop role-playing games, or do I wish I could stop? No, of course I don't wish I could stop. I started this channel because I wanted to do it, and I think it's fun, and I get a lot of pleasure and satisfaction out of doing it. And I hope that you all do as well. I'm just talking about, like, some of the things I wish I could talk about more, and looking for your help to help me when I do that. So the next time I post a video like a DM advice video or a review, if you could make sure that you like it and share it with your friends that maybe haven't seen my channel before, I would really, really appreciate it. The other thing that's interesting is, even within my history videos, there's definitely a wave of, like, what people are looking for and what they're not. So, like, I really like doing my overviews of Dragon Magazine, because people really aren't doing that. They're not covering that much. And I'm always providing that historical context. Who are these people that wrote this article, and why did they write it at this specific point in time? And what is the context behind why it was created and why it needed to be said, and things like that. But if I don't have a clickbaity title on those videos, they tank, because just putting down an overview of Dragon Magazine number 8, nobody's going to watch that. I've learned that lesson. So you might have noticed that my titles might be getting a little bit more tongue in cheek, and that's really to help make sure that people see them. That's it. I want people to see the content that I'm making, because that's why I make it, right? I don't make it for myself to watch. I already know all this stuff. So I'm hoping to expand people's knowledge of these things and make sure that these creators and things aren't forgotten, but also the periods of time aren't forgotten, of, like, how this game has evolved over time. And so doing this Dragon Magazine issue by issue, I think kind of helps us understand the direction the game was taking over time. But those videos in general just don't do as well as something like, if I put Blackmore, in a subject title, that video goes through the roof, for me, usually. So, but there's only so much Blackmore stuff that I can cover. I love talking about it, but also there's other topics. So anyway, that's this version of that. And hopefully that all makes sense to you. And I would love, again, to hear your comments below. At the end of the video, before I get into the bonus content and during the wrap up, I'm actually going to talk about some of the future videos that are coming up, and I would love to hear your thoughts on those. Okay, thanks. Okay, now we're going to do the third question, the last question that Ben Milton from Questing Beast asked those folks at the Game Expo. And that is, what is, like, a very strongly held opinion that you held on tabletop role-playing games that has changed over time? You've kind of changed your viewpoint on that. So I was originally going to talk about, basically just this idea of, like, moving away from systems where all of your character abilities were very clearly delineated, which is something that I did like. I loved the feats and skill system when I was first playing 3rd edition 20 plus years ago, because I thought it was a cool way to, like, customize your character and things like that. And I was going to talk about how I've moved past that. I don't want to say beyond, because there's a lot of people that still do that, and that's great for people that enjoy that. It's just not for me. But I decided to talk about something else, because this is something that I don't think anybody else talked about in interview that Ben did on his channel. But it's resource management. So you guys have heard me talk about resource management before, but when I was a kid, we never tracked any of that kind of stuff. You wrote it down on your sheet. You wrote down how many iron rations you had. You wrote down how many arrows you'd purchased, how many torches you purchased, but you never crossed them off. Or at least we didn't, right? It just wasn't something that you kept track of. And when I was a kid, when we went shopping and bought all of our stuff to create our characters at first level, that was the only time you ever did that. So somehow there was this magic assumption that that you bought all this stuff and then you just always had it going forward, I guess is my point. And it's because I think as kids, we didn't understand the game aspect of resource management. And in third edition, we hand waved it. I hand waved it for all my players and basically just said, like, you have what you need. And that was the easy way of doing it. And it never became an issue. But when I started playing the game with my daughter, the BX game with her and her friends, so we started in October of 2020, I was like, this is part of the game. And I've never really played it that way. And I want to see how it works. I want to see what happens if we put this into the game. And what I realized was how much tension and anxiety and fun it makes for those players when I put that in there. So one of the things that happened very early in that campaign was that the characters were without a light source and without food. They were trying to escape from a goblin prison, and they were fumbling through the dark. I don't use dark vision in my game. The elves have low light vision, or actually what's called infravision in BX. That's supposed to be based on heat sources, and this was a total cheat on my part, but the players went along with it. No one was upset. But I basically said, you're so far underground and it's so cold under here that everything looks the same. Everything is cold. I mean, if you saw a person approaching, you'd be able to see that. But as far as like maneuvering through, they were trying to maneuver their way out, figure out how to get out of these caves. And they were getting lost because they had no light source. And the difference in temperature, there was none. So they couldn't really see, again, it was a bit of a cheat on my part, but I was trying to instill this sense of fear in them. And they were so stressed, the stress of like feeling, they were, mimicking, like feeling along the wall of this cave system to try to figure out like where they were going. And then when they finally did get out of the caves and realized that they didn't have any food or water and what were they going to do? There was this look of panic in their face. And I realized like how much fun can be had by putting that back into the game. And then as I learned and studied more about it, I just realized like that was a core part of the game, this idea of managing your resources, because everything is tied to it. How long it takes you to get a resource could impact when a wandering monster is going to appear, how much time you spend hunting or foraging versus, you have your rations and eating them, or running out of a light source. And then what happens if you run out? And what happens if you're in the middle of combat and your light source runs out and the monsters can see in the dark, but you can't? Like all these different kinds of things, and how much fun that was, and how much fun I think that I'd been denying my players in my 3.5 game. I think it would have been fun to put that in. So resource management is really something that I've come around to as being what I think is like a cool central part of the game. And it's something that actually my players enjoy. If your players don't enjoy it, I guess don't do it. But I wouldn't assume that they're not going to like it until you've tried it and sort of worked it into a game. Now, I don't use the exact resource rules from BX, so I've tried a couple of different things over time to kind of see like what system works. So I know there's one system, I want to say it's Black Hack, which is like it's not a retro clone because it's not trying to clone an original edition of Dungeons and Dragons, but it's inspired by older editions of Dungeons and Dragons and then kind of becomes something. But in that system, I think for resources, you start on like a higher die type. Maybe it's a die 8 or something like that, or die 12, whatever it is. You start at a higher die type. And then every time you use that resource, you move to the lower die type. And then you have to roll it. What I recall, I might be remembering this incorrectly, but like say you started a D12. And you use the resource, as long as you don't roll a 1, you're fine, but you've moved to a D10. And then you use the resource, and then as long as you don't roll a 1, you're fine. You still have that resource, but you've moved to a D8. So you're slowly sliding down the scale to where at a certain point, you're going to have a D4. And if you roll a 1 on a D4, that's a 25% chance you're not going to have that resource. So again, I might not be explaining it exactly correctly, but there's an idea of like you're rolling dice to keep track of your stuff. And at a certain point, you'll just run out and realize you don't have that resource anymore. That's a little bit easier than tracking, although you do have to keep track of which die type that you're on. I know Professor Dungeon Master just mentioned he's working on one for his Deathbringer game that I think it was just like for his, I think what he said he was going to do was you roll a d6, and the first time you use that resource, if you roll a 1, it means it's out. And the second time you use it, if you roll a 1 or a 2, you're out. And then the third time, etc., until a certain point, you will be out unless you've resupplied. So those are ways that you can track it. Shadow Dark has a unique system for tracking light with like using actual time, like game time. Playtime, I should say, not game time, playtime. The actual playtime affects your torches. So like, I think every half hour you have to light a new torch or something like that. I don't have Shadow Dark, but I've heard very good things about it. So that's the kind of the way that I run it a little bit in my games. So I do a combination of dice roll mechanics to see like, do you still have this resource or not? And then it's up to the players to tell me when they get to town if they want to resupply. Now, I personally don't enjoy shopping. As a DM, I especially don't enjoy sitting my players looking there, going over the notebooks. So what I say is go to town, resupply, and then just cross off, and I just give them a number, right? So unless they're trying to buy something expensive, like a new weapon or something like that, but if they're just buying more rations and torches and arrows, I'll just say, you're in town, and, you know, including food and meals and stuff like that, just cross off whatever it is, 10 gold pieces, 20 gold pieces, depends on how long they've been gone and how much they have to resupply, and then move on. But then now you have those things again. And, but if they don't say they're doing that, well, then they don't have it, right? And so I do make them kind of on their sheet, sort of keep track of the things that they have. And, you know, originally it was like a 1-for-1. Like if they used rations, I would have them cross off and say, okay, make sure that you cross that off. And they would keep track. And then you'd see their eyes start to get scared as they realized that they were going to run out of rations before they probably got back to civilization. What was that going to mean? So I think resource management can be a very, very fun part of the game. It's something that I used to think was boring and slowed things down. And it didn't help move the story along. I know a lot of people will say, like, if it doesn't help move the story along, then why are you doing it? Well, I think tracking resource management, using that can become the story. If you don't, you know, if you can divorce yourself from being married to this pre-existing storyline that you think is really cool, why don't you use resource management and what happens when you run out to help propel a new story? Then the characters have to adventure and figure out where they're going to get these resources, or maybe they're going to come across someone that has them, and then they have to figure out, like, will they share them, or is there going to be a fight, or like, what is it going to be, right? That becomes the story. So don't look at it as being something that gets in the way of the story. Look at it as something that helps create the story. That's what I'm doing in my daughter's game. So, anyway, let me know what you think about that. I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that are not going to enjoy resource management. Totally cool. But let me know in the comments. All right. So that's the last part of those 3 questions. I'm going to do a quick wrap up here and then talk about the you know, what's coming up next on the channel. Okay. So for the wrap up, again, hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you like this different format. I hope you're okay seeing me on screen for the first time on my channel in like 2 years. And let me know what you think and whether you like this type of video again, or if it's something that you would prefer that, you know, I didn't do, and just go back to focusing on the hands and books and showing my collection and things like that, which is also fine if that's your viewpoint. Okay. But as far as things that are coming up, so I have a few. So I am going to be doing my 3rd part of my deep dive into the supplements for original D&D with Eldritch Wizardry. So that's going to be the next one of those that I do. I don't know if it's going to be my next video. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but Eldritch Wizardry was supplement 3. This is where the Druid debuts as a character class. Also Psionics are in here. It's also probably going to be the last of the OD&D supplements that I do. I think I don't really feel like I need to do one on Gods, Demigods, and Heroes because I already covered it in my video tribute to James Ward. But if you would like to see a deep dive on Gods, Demigods, and Heroes, of course, leave a note and let me know that that's the case. And I can make that happen for you. Something else I might be covering is the nice folks at Troll Lords Games actually sent me these books. This is Castles and Crusades. This is the Player's Handbook, but they also sent me the Dungeon Master or the Game Master's Guide, and they sent one that they call Monsters and Treasure. So this is their, monster manual book. But this is Castles and Crusades. Most people would consider this to be the first old school Renaissance game. 2004, I think, is when it first came out. And so it predates a lot of those other retro clones like a Labyrinth Lord or Osric, things like that. And this is the game that Gary Gygax was kind of like, he worked with Troll Lord Games on a bunch of products of his using the Castles and Crusades system. So they sent me these books to review, and so I just got them 2 days ago, and I need to still go through them and look at them. But I'm going to be doing a review of these, but I am going to be doing it from that historical standpoint, that historical context of why does this game exist? How is it different from the original versions of the game? Why was Gary Gygax designing for this version of the game instead of any other version that could have come along? All those kinds of questions I'm going to cover, especially, kind of delving deep into the Gary Gygax connection with the game. The other thing that they sent me that's really cool is this one. This is Castle Zagig. Zagig. Okay, whatever. I know people are always correcting my pronunciation. That's fine. But this is essentially part of Gary Gygax's Greyhawk campaign that he started working with the folks at Troll Lords on to publish. It was originally published in, I think, 2005, and then it stopped being published in 2008 and hasn't been available since then. So this is the reprint of this game. My understanding is that I don't have the original, but my understanding is that this is the exact original one. It's just, a new printing, but they didn't change anything. Maybe some artwork, but like no text was changed. So, this is the Yigsburg campaign setting by Gary Gygax. So I'm going to be doing that in a separate video. I think it's probably too much to try to cover in the one with Troll Lord Games, the Castles and Crusades stuff. So that's coming up. I am going to be doing more videos on my Dragon Magazine thing. I was just talking about that. So there will be more Dragon Magazine videos. I hope that you guys stick around for those and like and share those. And then one of my viewers, who is a long-term super fan supporter of the channel, pretty much for every video, he asked if I could do a video where I cover my home rules, my house rules for the BX game that I run for my daughter and her friends. And I'd already kind of been thinking about doing that. And I'm really intrigued to do that and share with you some of these things as part of my DM advice playlist. But definitely let me know if that's something that you would be interested in and would want to see me talk about as some of those home rules. So that's going to cover it then for like what might be coming up on the channel. So some history, some reviews, and some GM advice. And that's going to end this particular video. So thank you so very much for watching. And if you're looking for other ways to connect with me, of course, I am on social media, Facebook and Blue Sky and Instagram. I'm also, I have my blog. It's been a little neglected, but I am going to try to get back to it. You guys know I had some difficult times over the past few weeks, but I will be getting back to the blog soon. And then speaking of super fans, that's a way that you can support the channel and join all these other fine folks who help me to put these videos together. And then lastly, you can also visit my shop. So I would love if you could come check out some of these unique designs that I have. I'm adding a new one very, very soon, or I might have already added it by the time you see this. So make sure to check that out. Exclusive tabletop role-playing game designs that you can only find at my shop. So just really quick, wanted to point out this t-shirt I'm wearing. It's just an old school Star Wars design, but this was one of my dad's t-shirts, and he loved this one. And I think my wife might have given it to him for like Father's Day or his birthday. And so I kept it after, we were cleaning out his place. We're still in the process of cleaning it out, but I thought it would be fun to wear. So anyway, I'm wearing my dad's old shirt here. And thanks again to everybody who offered their condolences on his passing last month. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, so that's it for that. And thanks again so very much for watching. Stay safe, happy gaming, and I will talk to you next time. Okay, and welcome to the bonus content. This time, I wasn't really drinking this when I was making my notes for my video, but I'll go over that in a second. However, I was listening to this. So, I know maybe I'm bringing this up too often, but it's related. So, my dad passed away, and we're going to go through his stuff. He just passed away last month. And today is Monday, January 27th. And so anyway, he had a small stash of vinyl records, mostly stuff that he'd acquired new after he'd moved multiple times. So his bigger stash of the stuff that my mom and dad owned is in storage somewhere, and I've got to figure that out. That's a whole other thing. She died like, I don't know, 13 years ago, 12, I don't know, something like that. 12. And so there's a bunch of stuff because he had to downsize many, many times. And anyway, long story. But this is actually a record that I bought for him because his favorite song was Stardust. So I had seen this record, and I think I got it at my friend's record shop. I've mentioned before that he owns a vinyl store here in Burbank area. And I saw this record, and I wanted to get it because it's Lionel Hampton playing Stardust. But what's really cool about it is that where this was recorded is at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium. So this is the second of 2 albums now that I have that was recorded there. I also have a Louis Armstrong concert that was recorded there. And of course, I live in Pasadena, and I've been to the Civic Auditorium. So I think it's cool to find these old records that were recorded there. This was originally recorded in 1947, as you see here. And what's interesting is that it says Gene Norman presents the original Stardust by Lionel Hampton All-Stars. Okay, the only song on here that has Lionel Hampton on it is Stardust. So he plays vibes or vibraphone. Okay, and then you see all the other folks on here who are playing with him on that particular track. But then he disappears from all the other songs that are on here. It's the rest of the All-Stars that are still here. So the lineup changes a little bit, but you've got 1 O'Clock Jump, and then The Man I Love and Oh Lady Be Good. So these are all classic, George Gershwin, 2 of those, and then one by 1 O'Clock Jump, of course, by Count Basie. And then Stardust is by Hoagy Carmichael originally. So it was just one of my dad's favorite songs, to the point where in the CD era, when he was, everyone had CDs, he made an entire CD just of covers of Stardust. And there were so many that he then had to make a volume 2. And so he would sometimes get in the car, and it would drive me nuts because he would play and you just hear Stardust over and over and over and over and over again, all by different people. So, but it is a cool song. And I don't know why. It was just, for whatever reason, it was definitely just one of his favorites. So I thought this was cool when I was able to find this and pick this up for him. The version of Stardust that's on here is really, really good. So I really dug it when I played this. So I hadn't heard it when I bought it from my dad. I just bought it kind of like, because I knew he would enjoy it. And then when we were going through, my sister and I were kind of going through the small stash of records that he had kept or like acquired new, like I said, this was one of them, and she didn't want it. So I grabbed it to have and add to my collection. So that's really cool. Now, the other thing that I found, so my dad actually got into cocktails after I did, which is, everyone thinks it's backwards. Of course, he had cocktails before I was born, but as far as like, crafting cocktails at home and doing something more than just pouring like a whiskey Coke or, whiskey 7-Up, which was what he and my mom used to drink, bourbon and 7. I started to get into like, the crafting and the history, of course, because I like that kind of thing. But like, where do these drinks come from and what's the proper way to make it, using proper measurement techniques, knowing when to stir, knowing when to shake, buying proper glassware, all these different kinds of things. And as I got into it, that was also something that he ended up kind of getting into so that he could share that with me. And we could talk about it together, which was really fun. Well, he got into it so much, he ended up creating a YouTube channel with his buddy. And his buddy that he met is a guy that's like my age. But they had a whole series on YouTube called Drinking Buddies. And where they used to make drinks together and talk about them. And so part of cleaning out my dad's little apartment that he had 4 cupboards full of glassware and spirits. And so, a lot of them are things that I had introduced them to. A lot of them are things that he bought specifically just to make whatever drink it was that they were making for the show. Well, one of the things that I found that he had was this. This is... I'm going to try to say it in French, although I'm not great at that. You guys know that. Elixir Végétal de la Grande Chartreuse. So I've done chartreuse on the channel before. So this is basically a concentrated version of chartreuse. You can see it's 69% alcohol. Regular chartreuse is, I think, 55%, which is already kind of high. So 55% would be 110 proof, and this is obviously much more than that. So now the seal had been broken. I didn't do that. However, when I opened the bottle or opened this container, I pulled this out and realized he had never opened it. So I don't know where he got it. I don't know if it's a gift. I don't know if he bought it. My guess is that it was a gift from somebody, because had he bought it himself, he probably would have bought it specifically to use for something. But he hadn't opened it, and I thought, let's do that together. So I'll share this with you. So I have read that this is very strong and it should be used like bitters, or like you'd use absinthe, like as a mist or kind of rinsing a glass. However, something like this, I always want to try it neat first. So I'm just going to pour a little bit here. It's hard to see, but it is a dark kind of green color. It looks brown probably on the camera here, but in real life, it's like a dark brownish green, essentially. So it definitely smells like chartreuse. If you've ever had the green chartreuse, and I say green chartreuse, a lot of people say, like, isn't all chartreuse green? Well, the monks who make this make two different versions. They make a yellow chartreuse and a green chartreuse. If you've ever had the giant box of colors from Crayola, they actually have colors named that. Those colors are named that because of this stuff. It's not the other way around. So a lot of people don't know that, but they named that color green chartreuse after the spirit. So the liqueur. So let's give it a little taste. Yeah. If you are not used to drinking neat spirits, I definitely don't recommend drinking this straight. It's extremely alcoholic from the burn. It's very intense. So it's not something I think I would enjoy drinking neat. I will sip chartreuse, like regular green chartreuse. I will sip that neat as an after dinner, kind of a digestif. This, I wouldn't do that, I don't think. But what I have heard is that this works really well when you put a few drops in a glass of soda. So I thought I would try that as well. I'm not doing drops, obviously. I'm just kind of eyeballing here. I know that doesn't look like a lot, but I don't have that much soda water left in this bottle here. This is just San Pellegrino. So now I'm crossing the streams here because I'm putting an Italian sparkling water with a French elixir, but it's what I had. So just a little bit here, but I kind of wanted to see my idea. My thinking is that it's going to open this up and really help me kind of taste the flavors. Cheers. Salud, chin chin, all the things. Yeah, that worked exactly like I supposed it was going to. So I definitely am getting a much more earthy, like vegetal kick from this than I do from regular green chartreuse. And I don't know if that's because I'm being influenced by the name of this being called Elixir Vegetal, or if that's really part of the flavors. So I feel like regular green chartreuse is a little bit more herbal, and this, for whatever reason, is feeling or tasting a little bit more vegetal. I know that might sound weird to say you're drinking something that tastes vegetal, but it's part of the flavor experience. It's yeah, I might not have added quite enough, but anyway, I wanted to kind of do that and share that with you guys. My dad had a ton of barrel-aged cocktails that he had in his cupboard, so I bought him a couple of barrels years ago, and he's been using those, and kept very meticulous notes on how many times he used the barrel, what he put in it, how long it was in there, the exact ratio of ingredients, and then how to serve it. He has got it all. So you guys saw before, I think I showed one of his Rob Roys that he had brought over to my house for Thanksgiving. And he's got another Rob Roy in there from a different batch. He's got a Manhattan, Negroni, Boulevardier, Sazerac. So I suppose at a certain point, some of those might make an appearance here just because they're fun and different to share with you guys. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. And you like this little peek into some fun music. Definitely check out this version of Stardust if you've not heard it before, or just the song in general. It's actually a very pretty song, even with the lyrics, which are quite lovely, but this is just all instrumental. So thanks again for sticking through the bonus content. Hope you enjoyed that, and cheers, and I'll talk to you next time.